I know the last one we had a hands-on in-boat demo in 2011. Hello! Was very well received. So Paul Dodington has volunteered to, at the season end, how to prepare a Coventry Victor engine for layup over the winter. So pleased to welcome Paul. And again, we're going to try and keep it on track, so if we can wrap it up about 10 after 12, Paul, is that all right?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I can probably do it faster than that. So
okay.
People really want to talk at these things anyway.
Yes.
So. Anyway, everybody grab one, okay? Why don't I split these and some on one side, some on the other, okay? So even if you don't have a Coventry Victor, maybe you might have someday. You get old and sick and stupid and you can't pull a starter anymore. Or flip a flywheel, you know, the information's fine. Yes, there are. Yeah. There's a second sheet here which has a diagram, so make sure you get the second sheet. Everybody got their copy now? Okay. I sent some both sides.
One sheet or two sheets?
Two sheets.
Two sheets.
One has the diagram of the engine. There should be lots because Mary just ran them off. Who's got any spare diagrams?
They're coming around here now.
Oh, okay. Should be enough. Hope so, anyway.
We got the second page?
Yeah, it's hard to deal, aren't they?
Okay.
Who needs a picture? Picture?
Okay, can we start? All right, thanks. Well, there are many, many ways to lay up an engine. As long as three conditions are met, it doesn't really matter what you do. And what I'm going to explain today is a one which I have used for years because I look after and have looked after dozens of these boats, and you want something that's quick and efficient and does the job. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Basically, you're doing three things. You're getting all the water from the cooling system. And the all part is very important. There were two boats got damaged last year because all the water wasn't out. The other thing, you want to lubricate the engine to protect it for long-term storage and to simplify startup next spring. So then it's nice just to be able to get in and pretty well start them up and go. And the third thing is draining the fuel system to minimize carburetor corrosion. These carburetors on Coventry Victors are made of they're a zinc die casting, and they are very susceptible to moisture, susceptible to anything to do with alcohol in the fuel. The floats don't have the problem unless there's water left in the carburetor, and then the floats get crushed, and sometimes you see some of them that have been just flattened out. Anyway, I'll show you how I do it. There are many ways. You can do it either in the water or out of the water. I don't, maybe my preference would be to do it in the water, simply because when it's in the water you can tip the boat to one side, which helps for getting oil out and water out and stuff like that, but it's not entirely necessary. You do it on a trailer. But if it's going to be done on a trailer or on blocks, you've got to be able to get the propeller down. That's really important in this because you're going to be running the engine, and you don't want to run an engine with a dry universal joint. And it's just about impossible to get up under there and lubricate the thing. I mean, you can squirt half a quart of oil up there and most of it will leak down on top of you. So it's better to run them with the shaft down so it's straight and the U-joint doesn't care whether it's wet or dry. So the first thing to do is to drain the water. Well, you can do it either by you disconnect this fitting here. I'm not going to actually do it, but you need 2 wrenches. Put one there and one here. Okay? And undo that water intake line because that is the line where the water comes up from the lake. And if you're running the engine to winterize it with this line connected, you'll never run out of water because the lake's big. Okay? So take that one off. That helps to allow air to go into the pump. And then down here is the water drain cock on the lower water pipe. It's down on the starboard side of the boat. Okay, and you open that one.
Paul, about the size of wrenches to start with.
Well, it varies. Most Coventry Victor engines, most of these take a 3/4 here and 11/16 here, but that's British sizes. You know, the Brits do things differently. You know, they're not as niggardly as the Americans are in terms of the size of the bolts. You know, the Americans cut down. The British bolts are always too big. So anyway, you know, just make sure that whatever wrench you use, I mean, this isn't very tight. It's called a cone type fitting, and it's a male and female conical shape, and it's very easy to take apart. But that's the one you take apart, the one that leads down through the hull, okay? That then will allow this line to drain by gravity, and you squirt some oil into the pump, and I use a pump oiler like this, and you just put it in there and you just give it a few squirts and some of it will leak out, but that lubricates the gears in the pump and helps to prime it for next year. So you're already doing some of your springtime priming just by doing that. So wait until the water has all drained out. Some of these engines have a peculiar characteristic where they drain themselves mostly. And once in a while I'll run into one where you drain the water. If it hasn't been run for 3 weeks, there isn't any water in it. Of course, it makes the engine last longer if persons forget in the fall, you know, to drain things. But most of them don't drain, and you have to open that valve down here, okay? And you'll see the water dripping out into the bilge. Now that doesn't get all the water out, though. The problem is that the Brits, of course, it's typical of them, they set the engine up on a bench in their shop, and the engine's sitting level. We talked earlier about shaft angles. It's roughly 15 degrees in a Dippy, and so this engine is tilted at about 15 degrees. So the water has to run uphill through the lower water pipes. And if you look on your diagram here, you can see these water pipes at the bottom. You can see where the water drain is. And those pipes are coming off the lower water covers of the cylinder, and they're running uphill towards that drain. So that means that there's always a little bit of water left in the bottom of the cylinders, and there's always water in those pipes. And you'll often see those pipes with aneurysms on them. You know, if they haven't burst, they're huge. They look like those funny balloons you see at parties, you know. And so it's very common for those things to burst. So this is how you avoid that. Okay, so we're now down to number 3. After all the water has drained, now this is very important. It doesn't work if you try to do this too fast, and it only takes, you know, about a minute to drain the water. Make sure it has drained. And if you can tip the boat over to this side, it helps to, you know, make it come out a bit too. After all the water has drained, start the engine and run it at medium speed. Now, if you're doing it on a trailer, you've got to lubricate the skeg bearing. So get underneath there, take your squirt oil and just put some oil on it, okay? And if you can raise and lower the handle a bit, that wipes the oil on the shaft. Because you can, I have seen it, I've never done it myself, but I've seen it where the shaft will gall and seize to the bearing, and it does some nasty stuff when that happens. It's very hard to get it apart so that you can fix it. But if you oil it, never happens. You then stuff a rag into the exhaust outlet. You've got your engine running, okay? There's no water in it, and it's not sucking any water from the lake. And you can either lean over the side with the thing running and stuff the rag in there and hold it there as hard as you can and watch if you can, or have somebody watch over here. And you're going to find there's a lot more water is going to come out. So what is it that we're doing here? Well, if you look at the exhaust system, and you can see it on the picture here, see the muffler at the side? Well, that's the water delivery pipe, that thing that's hook-shaped going into the top of the muffler. And if you stop the exhaust from escaping from the muffler, it's got to go somewhere. So what it does is it goes back through this pipe into this T-joint, and it splits here, goes down into the cylinders, and it pressurizes the water jackets on each side. That then forces any water which is at the bottom to go up into that lower water pipe, and it all squirts out down there. You've still left the valve open. I always leave those valves open in winter. That's the best way of getting water out of these. Now, if you cannot get the engine to run and it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon and there's a blizzard starting and you have no other choice, the only other way that you can do it is to lift the back end of the boat up miles. Get it up so high that those lower pipes are draining forward. And you really have to get the back end high to do that. And in fact, it's likely to slide off a belt if you do it. So try to avoid that situation if you can. Try and blow it out. And sometimes I've even let the engines run long enough until steam starts coming out. It takes about 3 minutes. You can run these things a long time without any water in them. And of course, the more water you get out of them, the better. So, but just stuffing the rag in the exhaust, that's the best, the most efficient way of getting the water out.
I find it's best with a wet rag.
Yeah, well, they get wet. Yeah. Oh, yeah, because it burns you. It's hot. Yeah,
it allows less air to come through, too.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, sure. If you're doing it in the water, of course, what happens, you get to this side and the thing's underwater anyway, so yeah. Okay, yeah, thanks. Okay. Then you let the engine run 2 or 3 minutes until it is uncomfortably hot to the touch. The idea here is that you're warming up the oil in the crankcase. Now, what I used to do and used to advise people to do is to run the engine for like 10 or 15 minutes, take it out for a ride, because particularly if it's a cold day, that 20W50 oil is pretty damn thick, and it takes a year and a day to come out, and it's pretty slow. So there's an oil drain, and any of the engines that I have rebuilt have a special oil drain on it that drains the debris from underneath the oil filter. Because one of the chronic problems with these engines is that the debris builds up, the mud builds up in the bottom of the crankcase, and over a period of years, it builds up to the point where it sucks it into the oil filter. And then it distributes this slurry of mud through the engine bearings and destroys them, and it ruins them in this order. The rear main bearing goes first, then number 2 connecting rod, then number 1 rod, and usually by that time number 1 isn't getting any oil at all, which is good because they'll run for ages with no oil because they're babbing. And so usually number 1 bearing, the front crankshaft bearing, never wears. But the back one is notorious for wear, and the wear is so bad, and it's because it's almost like valve grinding compound that's going around in the engine. So this business of cleaning the oil out, or changing the oil regularly, is really, really important. And I know, Bill, your recommendation...
3 times a year.
Yeah. But, or what, 10 hours, roughly?
Every 10 hours, change the oil. It's
Yeah.
just-
Cheapest
so
insurance you can buy.
it's the-
That's-
Yeah, it's Joe, it's the cheapest insurance, and
Yeah.
I rig it up with a hose on the side, just drain it into a bread pan on the side.
Yeah, well, the pan that I use is, this is the actual one here, never rusts, and you put it right down in under there. Now, we've got a battery in the way here, so it's hard to do in this one, but anyway, there's
That's,
that.
I usually pull the seat base back.
Oh, yeah, and you can get it in.
I use this type of pan.
Oh, yours is a little, yeah, that'll work. Because all it needs to do is hold something less than a liter.
You can get those at the grocery store.
Yeah,
With chicken in them.
sure.
Eat the chicken
And you just use, you know, little, I usually have them with a 1/8 pipe plug on the bottom. It's right down, I don't know whether you can see it or not, right there. He's already changed the oil, so I'm not gonna mess with it. That's it there, and just drain it into that pan. Now, this is the boring part, because you're gonna have to find something to do for at least half an hour, because it's gonna take forever for it to come out, particularly if it's cold. But this is a really important part of the job, is to get that oil out of there. And don't lose the plug. Usually what I do is I stick it in this little notch on the seat here, and then it's less likely to go into the bilge, but it still can if the boat's rocking. So that's the procedure for for getting the oil out. And if you want to sit on this side of the boat to tilt it over this way, that's a good thing to do as well. Okay, so once the oil is all out, okay, where are we? Step number 5. Yeah, we're done. Yeah. Then you replace the oil plug. Don't forget that. You don't get anything on the dipstick if you don't replace that. Yeah, yeah, no, that's what I said. Yeah. Now there are different lengths of filler pipes on these things, and these tall ones are nice because you can pour the oil in relatively fast, but the lower ones are very, very slow to take the oil. You've got to take the dipstick out. I remember one time I was doing one of these boats in a dark boathouse, and I forgot to take the dipstick out, and it took me about an hour to put the oil in, and I couldn't figure out why it was so slow. Well, of course, it was because the dipstick was in there, and the oil was like wax, you know, going very slowly down the stick. So remember to take the dipstick out when you're putting the oil in. And the amount that you put in, if you don't have to measure it on the dipstick, because it doesn't give you any decent measurement anyway. It's 900 milliliters. It's just under 1 liter. So I usually take this something and, you know, have it.
Yeah, I always have a jug like this.
Yeah.
And I've marked on it
Yeah.
the level.
Yep.
And then I just set that in a funnel
Yep.
and leave it. It does take a while.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
But you can't go fast. You can't dump it all in.
No, no.
It's very slow.
Slower than the hour hand of eternity. Yeah. Okay, so you've got the oil in. If you put too much oil in, what you'll get is spark plug foul. Usually that's what happens. And if you run into a Country Victor engine that's really fouling up its spark plugs, the chances are that the oil is too high. These engines really don't have enough capacity in the bottom ends. Some of the ones, like Dave Moffat's boat, actually was done at the factory with a deep sump on it. It's really spectacular how much oil he can put in that thing, but not these. These ones have to be, you have to be pretty careful not to put too much. So too much is almost worse than too little.
Yeah, blow it out the rear main.
Yeah, well, I never had that happen.
Lots of oil in the bilge.
Oh yeah, but oil in the bilge isn't coming out. I've never ever had one that was throwing any oil out through the rear oil seal. What appears to be coming out the rear oil seal is oil coming out, leaking out of the oil pump at the top, and it drips down onto the hub of the flywheel, and it makes you think that it's coming out through that seal, but it's not the seal at all. It's the oil pump that's leaking, and generally it's the oil pressure relief valve on the pump, whose gasket has a little sort of a fiber gasket on there, and it could have a little tiny crack or just roughness on it from being screwed down onto dirt or something, and usually that's where the oil is coming from. But I've never in my life ever run into one where the rear oil seal.
The point is too
failed.
much comes out.
It comes out, yes it does. Okay,
That's the big reason for changing the oil regularly, is it keeps the sludge
Yeah.
out of the oil so that the bearings don't wear out and
Yes.
the rear main seal doesn't leak.
yeah.
'Cause I was having trouble.
Yeah,
with mine,
because the
rear
only time
seal
the rear
leaked.
main seal would really give a problem would be if the crankshaft started
Yeah.
jumping up
Yeah,
and down,
'cause
and
it
hammering.
begins
the
to
thing.
pump the oil out
Yeah.
the rear main.
Yeah, I always put a double lip seal on them now because they last longer. Yeah.
So what grade of oil did you want to put in it then?
20 W50. Yeah. If the engine has been rebuilt, you can use 10 W30. It all depends on what your oil pressure is like when the engine's hot, and if your oil pressure is really, really low with a hot engine. There are two reasons for that. Maybe the rear main bearing is worn, but as long as you've got oil pressure, you're all right. The other,
What's a good oil pressure for that, Paul?
pardon?
What's a good oil pressure for?
Well,
when it's
they're
hot?
supposed to be between 20 and 40 pounds.
Right.
If they get down below 10, you got trouble. But generally speaking, low oil pressure in a Coventry Victor doesn't have so much to do with how thick the oil is, but it has to do with debris that's underneath the oil pressure relief valve holding the ball off its seat. And that is extremely common, and if that happens, you've got to take that little cheese-headed screw out back here and get a dental pick and pull the thing out, and of course you'll drop it in the bilge, but if you have a magnet there, it helps, you know.
Where is it?
It's this guy right here,
Oh, yeah?
cheese-head screw.
And there's an adjustment under that?
The adjustment is the spring tension.
Yeah.
And you can put the different number of washers under it. But if you have to increase, is this thing turning? It's loose. Is that loose on purpose?
No.
It's not leaking?
No,
Okay. All right. All right.
because I was running too high oil pressure.
Yeah. Well, you can put another
When
washer.
I start this, it'll run 5 minutes at 60 pounds. So
Yeah, but that's okay. Yeah, they usually go right up to the end of the gauge, as long as they don't burst the pour down tube in the gauge. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I didn't change it. I hope I didn't.
Oh, it's all right.
I think I got it back to the same spot.
Mary knows what to do.
Okay. Does she? Okay. All right. God help you if it comes out. I don't think it will, but
Paul brings up a very good point about that pressure relief valve under that spring.
yeah.
If your oil pressure is dropping, that's the very first thing to check.
Yeah. Don't tear
Sometimes
the
you'll
engine
get dirt
down.
in there, or sometimes that little pin there will get pitted.
Yeah.
And Paul has a technique where he just taps it with a hammer and a punch.
Yeah, a
and
little-
you can just sort of peen it
Yeah.
so they match again.
That's right. Some of them have a ball bearing in there, but most of them have this plunger. The trouble with the ball bearing is that you can't get it out unless you have a magnet and stick it down in there, and then the whole pump is magnetic anyway, so very hard to get it out without turning the boat upside down. So I think they did away with the ball and put the plunger in so that you could actually get access to the plunger. It's just a plunger with a ball-shaped end. And it goes up inside the spring. And normally when you pull the spring out, it's a little coil spring. Normally when you pull that out, the plunger will come with it. So that's what you hope anyway. Okay, now we're up to, at the end of number 6 there, it says the oil should come up only to the low mark on the dipstick, no higher. A lot of people put it up to the high mark on the dipstick. Well, of course, if you just put your 900 milliliters in, you don't need to measure it on the dipstick. And the dipstick is a very poor way of finding out how much oil's in these anyway, because they're rolling around in the water and the oil's so thick that once it's on the stick, it never goes down. And you have to leave it about 3 days and step very gingerly into the center of the boat so that you don't rock anything, and then take it out. And then you can see what the oil level is. But I prefer to know how much I put in. Drain it out, put 900 milliliters in, and then forget it. And then it should be all right.
When it's on a slant like that, it's probably a good idea just to put it to fill it no higher than the low mark
The low
on the
mark.
stick.
Yeah, the low mark is really the high mark. You see, the Brits do these things sitting level on a bench.
It's a motorcycle engine.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. They like to create problems for you, you know. Or you need to understand how they did it. That's really what it is.
Well, it was built for different purposes. Why?
That's right. It was built to be worked on, yeah. Okay, where are we here now? We got the oil in. Okay, remove number 2 valve cover. Now, I used to tell people to remove both valve covers because really what you need to do is lubricate once in a while your valve stems, particularly the exhaust one.
Well, could I offer this as a save you a lot of work?
Oh, well, I just wanted to. Oh, that's awfully tight. Well, anyway, you can see here. This is where the valves run through the valve guides, and there are springs on here and so on. What you're really trying to do is just put a drop of oil on each one of those valve guides. Number 2 cylinder is the one that is the closest to the muffler, and that's where all the rusting comes from, because the water, when the engine's running, is being pumped into the muffler, and there's always you all notice that you see rusted out exhaust systems on these. They're always rusted out right near the muffler. The rest of the thing is mint, but all the trouble is there, and sometimes a little bit of water runs down into number 2 cylinder. And so number 2, when you're taking one of these engines apart, is always the one that shows corrosion from having water in it. So I wouldn't bother pulling the starter off and doing number 1. They virtually never stick, but quite often they will on number 2. And so, just taking that cover off there and squirting some oil, just a drop of oil, just on those valve stems. Yeah, thank you, Joe. Yeah,
That's the result.
yeah,
It's a freezer.
yeah. Oh, yeah. That's when the whole thing freezes, and
And
the
the-
bottom ones, yeah. Usually, if they've been drained but they haven't been run, the bottom one breaks open, and of course, you see how easy it is to get at under here.
Yeah, really.
Especially to drill the broken screws out that you break off when you're trying to take it apart. So the whole thing is, just put that rag in the exhaust. You're going to save yourself huge amounts of work, So that works well.
Is there any gasket, Paul, beneath the valve cover?
No,
That's
no,
back
it's
on
just
the
a kind of a clamshell. It's just to sort of keep dirt and water over there. So
So is that all, then it's dry, there's no lube
there's
getting?
no lubricant in there at all.
Oh,
No.
for heaven's sake.
The oil
Unless
themselves
there's a
by
little bit
osmosis.
that works its way up through the tappet guides, but very little in it.
I never would.
Yeah.
Carpet thing in it.
I have reasons.
Yeah, some people I've seen have drilled actually holes in the 2 covers right over the exhaust stems, and so they don't have to take the cover up. But I don't like that because water can get in there. Who knows what's going to happen. So, okay, remove the spark plugs. Okay, now that's easy enough to do. Where's that big wrench? Okay, one of these guys. You just take the 2 spark plugs out, and I won't do it right now. And remember always that if you're going to turn the engine or anything like that, make sure the switch is off, okay? Because the magneto can be destroyed if you crank it with the wires off, okay? So just remember that, because if the energy has no place to go, it tends to puncture the secondary winding in the magneto. So just always be aware of that when you're working on a Coventry Victor, because sometimes you're turning the flywheel for some reason, and maybe you're trying to suck oil into the cylinders. You don't want to have the switch on. So as long as the switch is turned off, which you've done because you just stopped the engine after the heat up thing. So you're going to take your squirt oiler and you're going to squirt 3 squirts into each cylinder, okay? And you can put the spark plugs back in. Just put them in finger tight. You don't need to tighten them up. Just finger tight's good enough. Start the engine and run it for 5 seconds, okay? And let it rev a bit for 5 seconds, okay? Now what this is doing 2 things. One is you're lubricating the upper end of the cylinder and the valves and valve seats. You're also putting some oil out into the exhaust system to help prevent it from rusting. The other thing you're doing is you've just put fresh oil in, and what you're doing is pumping that oil, that fresh oil, through the bearings. And oil, when it's new, has corrosion inhibitors in it. So that's the stuff that you're wanting to get in. So By the time you finish this, you will have run it 15 or 20 seconds on the new oil, and that's all the time that it takes to get the fresh oil into the bearings, and the corrosion inhibitors are there and will protect those bearings over the winter. So you're doing that a total of 3 times. So each time you do it, the smoke will get worse. Like the first time you won't get much smoke at all. Second time you'll get medium smoke, and the third time there are clouds of it. And 5 seconds is about the right length of time, and give it about a third throttle maybe, or half throttle. The engine has to be going fairly fast because you want lots of turbulence in there, okay? Because that's going to pump a lot of oil out through the exhaust here and help to cut down on the corrosion on the pipe. And after the third time, you'll have huge smoke, and if you're not having smoke, you're not doing it right. There should be a lot of smoke. It's very environmentally friendly, this process. But you have to look at the other way, that if you don't do it, it's even more environmentally unfriendly. Okay, so where are we down to now? Finger tight plugs, and we run at medium speed. Okay, so you've shut the engine off. Next thing we want to do is get the gas out. Well, you can get these things at Arabian Tire. If you're going to do it in the boat, you have to have a can where you can put the end of the siphon down into it. It's got to have a big opening in it because gas only flows downhill in a siphon. If the boat's on a trailer like this, you can just put the siphon over the side of the boat and down below, and you want to siphon as much gas out of that tank as you can. Now, there are different theories about leaving the tank full or the tank empty. I tend to believe it's better to empty the thing because then you don't waste the gas. You can keep the gas in a sealed container all winter. I've used a gas that's 2 years old. If you keep it absolutely tight, it's okay.
I burn it in my lawn tractor. Does that make you wince?
That's okay. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. If you want to use it up, that's fine. Yeah. You're living from day to day. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, the idea is to get the tank dry. You shut the valve off under the tank because you don't want any more gas coming to the engine. In fact, these, if you wanted to, the 3 5-second runs can be done just on